everybody. Welcome to It's Not Your Money, real talk about achieving racial equity in philanthropy. These slightly irreverent but frank conversations feature leaders challenging the status quo plaguing philanthropy today, and those who are demonstrating how we can collectively build a more equitable and just funding landscape. And that's particularly for Black, Indigenous, other people of colour, women and non-binary founders. I'm Jessamyn Shams-Lau, funder in residence at the Capital Collaborative by Camelback Ventures, and I'm your host today. I spent over a decade leading leading a California family foundations, a tongue twister in there, advocating for philanthropy with humility, and also co-authored the book Unicorns Unite: How Nonprofits and Foundations Build Epic Partnerships. Today, we are trying something a little bit different, and I'm super happy to be welcoming back one of our fabulous previous It's Not Your Money guests, Allandra Bulger, ED of Co.act Detroit. And we are also lucky to be joined by Kate Levin Markel, president of the McGregor Fund. And we are going to have a conversation about power dynamics between white funders and the leaders of color who fundraise from them. And so our goal today is to speak openly, frankly, about these dynamics at play, but also hopefully to model how those who fund, those who fundraise, can have real conversations about power, about race in their relationships. So without further ado, Allandra, Kate, I would love for you both to just tell us a little bit more about yourselves.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. Hi again, Jessamyn. First and foremost, just supreme gratitude to you for the opportunity to be in conversation today. As you mentioned, I'm Allandra Bulger. I have the distinct honor and privilege of serving as the inaugural executive director at Co.act Detroit. Co.act is a hub that accelerates transformative impact with nonprofit and community organizations in Southeast Michigan. And we do this work through collaborative idea generation, cross-sector resources, and equitable access to world-class programming and learning. In our local context, we kind of sit at the nexus of the nonprofit and philanthropic communities. And we really are just working to foster a more equitable, connected, and resilient nonprofit community. Outside of my role at Co.act, I consider myself to be a creative and an avid reader. And so lately I've been toying around with sketch art. It's not any good, but it's just been something to kind of get my creative muscles going. And revisiting the works of the author Octavia Butler, which feels so relevant to our world right now. And then really exploring titles that interrogate our collective relationship to work and rest. So that's kind of where I am in this moment.
Amazing. Just wanted to jump on the Octavia Butler piece. Have you watched the new production of Kindred yet?
I have. And that was the first book of hers that I read, and the show, the adaptation, definitely does the book justice.
Yeah, really does. Thank you for that quick tangent. Kate, over to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's really a pleasure to be here. And Allandra, I have a feeling you had something to do with the invitation as well. So thank you so much for thinking of me, and more importantly, the organization that I'm a part of. The McGregor Fund is a 100-year-old independent foundation in the city of Detroit. Our grant making really is place-based within our city, and to some degree, areas just adjacent to. We focus on people. We don't focus on the built environment. We don't focus on particular ideas, but we do specifically focus on people whose families have been experiencing intergenerational poverty. We focus on people who don't have enough money to live their lives, and in some cases to help themselves overcome real significant systemic and personal challenges that they have faced. So if you're interested in what we do, you can certainly check us out on the website. But we try to be good partners. That's the beginning and the end of why we're here. We get to decide how to interpret our mission from time to time. We try to be compassionate and smart about that, and get input. The foundation has changed over the 100 years, but not as much as you might think. We're very lucky that we were founded by a social entrepreneur and social reformer who founded an institute for homeless men in the 1890s as a very young man and an unknown person without money in the city of Detroit before the automobile industry. And he left us a 40-year legacy of extraordinary work that would hold up today to give us inspiration. So I have to say, we're particularly lucky that our founding spirit was given to us by someone who wasn't interested in making money and who was interested in tackling systems in this country that were not properly developed in serving people. So I think that's given us a certain humility, actually. We can talk more about who was the board of directors on this foundation. I think that might be interesting to get into. So we feel a little exceptional. But we all love every single minute in our day working with incredible leaders in community like Allandra. And personally, I'm just a baby boomer barely. So I feel like I have a different world view from a lot of the dynamic leaders coming up today. It is so exciting to watch the ascent of younger leaders, and I just need to get out of the way soon so that you all can keep changing this world the way it needs to be changed.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kate. And thank you for giving us a sneak peek into the history of the foundation. As you said, maybe that will come up in our conversation. In It's Not Your Money tradition, we are going to start with our favorite warm-up question. It's one of the reasons that this series is called It's Not Your Money, is because when we incorrectly label the money in foundation endowments and donor advised funds as still belonging to the founders, then we subsequently act like the money in the foundation belong to them, and that just perpetuates the concentration of power. So with that framing, words influence who holds power. And I would love to hear, and Allandra, knowing that you have already answered this question, so you're more than welcome to give us a different answer or double tap on the same as last time. But to throw out the question to both of you, what shift in language do you believe we need to make in order to help diversify power and funding?
Yeah, I'm happy to add some additional language, particularly in the context of this conversation. So you're absolutely right. Words have immense power. And I think what I've been thinking about in preparation for this conversation is the keen difference between ownership and stewardship, right? And so this is one shift in language that I think we need to make that might help diversify power and funding, right? Like ownership can certainly have an element of care, right? But I think stewardship is more closely aligned with the role foundations would ideally play. So, stewardship is really about the careful and kind of thoughtful and responsible manage and oversight of something that's entrusted to your care. So to me, I think the stewardship means like there's added concern and understanding, right, for the organization that you're caring for, but also for the resources that you have on the behalf of others. And so I would start there. I would think, really just the notion of thinking about those resources in the context of stewardship. And then the other word or words that were coming to mind for me as I was thinking about this was exploring, terms such as equitable funding and unpacking what that really means and who's really benefiting. Terms like equitable funding can have different meanings for grantees and for funders. So those were the two words that kind of came up for me when I was thinking about this question.
Brilliant. And I suspect we are going to dive into some of those points a little bit more as the conversation continues. But over to you, Kate. Tell us your take on this question.
Well, I think we're here to talk about what's wrong with philanthropy. So I'm going to really focus on the philanthropic side.
Brilliant.
I think that when the institution of the foundation was created, it was modeled after a bank.
Mm.
And so you had officers staffing, and you have owners of a bank, you know, whether it's in the old days, a family or an individual or shareholders. You have a board of trustees. The entire construct very much resembles a for-profit bank. And so I think all of the labels that have been given to the people involved in the work and in the institutions, just from the beginning took on this quality. And like Allandra was saying, we really need a complete shift. So for example, I think the term program officer is weird. And I have a colleague in Detroit who loves to say about the organization that he's with, you know, when we really had good conversations with community, they said, why do you call yourselves officers?
Right.
Officers of what? What are you policing? So I think that term's ridiculous. And I was a program officer for many years. And then I got promoted to this position I'm in now. And we don't have program officers, but I think the same can probably be true for people in my position and for our board of trustees. Yes, they're a board of trustees, but can't we get a little more creative and move away from the corporate functions and talk about the responsibility and the responsibility to community and how to capture that purpose rather than using this corporate dominant, white dominant language.
Thank you, Kate. It's a fascinating observation that as soon as you said it, I'm like, yes, of course, that's where the language comes from. It's exactly the same as the banking industry. And then, of course, you think about the goals of our industry versus the banks, and that makes no sense for us to continue this tradition of inheriting and maintaining those labels. So fully with you on that. I really, really like that that challenge to just completely let go. And you know, we have the power to relabel our roles, you know, with whatever makes the most sense when we center the values that we're really driving for in our work. And I think that kind of tees up our next question quite nicely, because I think the roles, the titles that we have, as you said when you talked about coming into community and community questioning, why are you an officer? What are you an officer of? The way we present or identify ourselves, like, has an influence on our relationships, has an influence on this interaction that we have, and it has an influence on power dynamics.
Yes.
Between the funders and the fundraisers, you know, between the executive directors of the foundations and the nonprofits or the program delivering organizations. So I would love to just move us along to this next question of just laying it all bare. How would each of you describe, I know this is a very big question to ask you to answer in just a couple of minutes, but how would you describe the power dynamics between funders and white funders particularly, and fundraisers of color?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in first. You know, I feel like the current state of the relationship between the funder and fundraiser is disproportionately valued, right? There's a significant power imbalance between those with funds and those seeking funds. And generally, the funder holds the power because they control the money, right? And so that power, I think, helps to shape priorities, right? It shapes who funders talk to. It shapes who they listen to. It shapes who has access to them. It shapes who they themselves have access to, right? There's an immense amount of privilege that comes along with that power. And I feel like those imbalances are multi-layered and multi-dimensional, right? So they're both visible and they're both invisible, right? So there are power dynamics that, say, for example, may inform funding decisions. That may be something like funding criteria, or there are power dynamics that may impact access and communication, right? And blatantly omit the voices, the contributions, the knowledge, the expertise of those folks who are those folks who most often understand the needs of their community, right? And I think to your question, this is especially true when it comes to organizations led by people of color. You know, in our local context, we've witnessed the disproportionate funding between organizations that are led by white leaders and organizations that are led by people of color. And so, you know, at Co.act, one of the things that we try to do to advocate for and dismantle racism and inequity is participatory grant making. And this includes involving the community in decision making and bringing visibility to leaders and organizations that may be often overlooked. And so this is also something that we do in partnership with foundations, right? So through value-aligned partnerships with philanthropic entities, we work to include the community in the creation and design of those types of programs, the decision-making, everything from the selection of the grantees to, you know, often the priorities. And I think that while power dynamics are certainly a challenge, one way that we move forward is to think about shared goals and challenges together, right? Even if it's uncomfortable, because it is uncomfortable. You know, if we're talking about evaluating, dismantling, recreating, reimagining structures, that's going to be a very uncomfortable process.
Hey.
Well, I can't really speak to the power dynamic because I've only been on one side. And I've been, furthermore, you know, working within for over 20 years, a majority white foundation in a majority Black city. So you should ask people asking for money from our foundation how we show up and how others show up. We don't get feedback, as you know. When you work for a foundation, everybody thinks you're wonderful if you fund them, and if you don't, they're afraid to tell you you aren't because they want to get funding someday. So the only way to really know how you're doing and get feedback is to hire a third party to anonymously survey everybody, which people do. So I have no idea. That's part of the problem. I don't know. I can guess. I mean, people talk to me. I feel really, really humbled to have relationships with leaders throughout the city, of organizations I really admire, who I've known over the years, who have felt comfortable talking to me what it feels like in general, or about some of my peers. So I feel I've been given some insight by people who shared, but this is the problem. There's no feedback loop. When you think about it, foundations are accountable to themselves. There's no accountability. We don't have to prove ourselves. We don't need to raise money to stay in business. We don't need to do a good job. We don't need to win patrons and clients and consumers. We don't need to get certifications. We don't need to get good reviews. We don't need to get any of the things. There's no the attention. We don't have to do any of the things that our partners need to do just to stay in business. So that's how they get feedback every minute of the day from all these people whose approval they need. We don't need anyone's approval, and we don't get honest feedback. So as long as that is the case, there's not going to be a change in the dynamic. So the key is to have there be very much a reflection of the same community you're committed to serving to populate your organization, so that there don't seem to be these gaps, these differences of who we are. And that's hard to do. So I would say the biggest problem is there's no accountability.
Right.
And until you figure that out, or you insist on it yourself and you find a way to do it authentically, where people really will tell you when you're doing a good job or not, which is hard to do because people don't want to. It's really hard to shift that dynamic. Now, I mean, I can talk to you about how we as one organization try, but you've got to want to do it from within the foundation. And then you've got to, you've got to build trusting relationships where you feel some confidence that people will let you know if you're not doing something well.
Allandra, do you want to jump in there? See you nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate like the honesty and the transparency from the seat with which you said. I think, living and working in inequitable systems makes it very easy to be complicit and to replicate the behaviors and the norms of dominant culture. I think for me and the organization that I lead, because we sit at the intersection of nonprofits and foundations, and because of my proximity to philanthropy, there is an element of power, privilege, and access that I have, that some of our closest partners and those that we serve are simply denied, right? And so it takes courage to challenge racism and white supremacy, and the dire impact that they continue to have on our communities. At the same time, as a Black woman leader, I also experience diminished power and racism and sexism in my work, and have in the past, and sometimes find myself in a place where I have to question the negotiation of my own values, right, to garner resources for my organization and my community. And that comes with a cost, right? Like certainly personal cost, but that comes with a cost. So I think one example that comes to mind for me when I think about, my own actions and my own self-awareness, at the onset of COVID-19, myself and 4 other women, leaders of colors, executive directors, and CEOs forged a collective to have a comprehensive response to the various needs in our community. And our group faced immense external pressure, right? Funding inequities amongst the partners, varied levels of access with philanthropic partners. And so while we certainly desire to respond to the acute needs of our community, I was personally complicit in encouraging like the sense of urgency, right? That did not afford us the collaborative space to align values, to align goals, those things that really are central to the way in which I and those partners work, right? Because we were like, we wanted to get something done. It was that white supremacy kind of tenet of like, hurry, 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 perfection, perfection, perfection. And so I think, it contributed to an environment where some folks felt unheard and unsupported. And it ultimately impacted, our ability to respond to the community in the ways we all desire, nor did it prioritize, our respective organizational health. And so as a group, we've undergone restorative practices, and we practice a value of loving accountability that I think has increased my self-awareness and how I show up and how I myself approach power sharing. But certainly even as a Black leader, we are susceptible to replicating those norms.
I appreciate you saying that, Allandra, because there is something of like almost a gravitational pull or this big black hole type pull towards practices that really perpetuate the power imbalance, right? We may know intellectually this is not the way we want to operate, or we may know emotionally that we believe in doing things a different way, but we're still all part of this system that has norms and habits and expectations and social reinforcement as well. And so like what I hear from both of you, Kate, when you're talking about organizational culture, and Allandra, when you're talking about the level of privilege that comes in your kind of dual role as well, is that there is it takes like almost double the concerted effort to continue to fight against that gravitational pull towards the status quo. And so, it's like the quote about the moving walkway, right? Unless we are actively walking in the opposite direction, we will be carried along in these habits of perpetuation. And I want to dig a little bit deeper about habits and actions and expectations that feel like they're just part of the norm of funding and fundraising. And just ask you both, like, is there anything that you have each wondered about how or why funders or fundraisers do certain things that perpetuate power dynamics that you're like, wait, why do they keep doing that? That's just perpetuating the power dynamic. Like, is that not something that they can change really easily? Like, what are those? Are there things that pop out to you?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I have a wonder and a curiosity about, and Kate has hit on it a little bit, is this notion of accountability, right? And how do we make the shift, or what does that look like in real time to create accountability structures, even if those are organizational in nature, even if they don't exist in the broader context. That's one question that I have. It's just like, how are funders thinking about accountability to themselves, even, right? And accountability to the things that they say they want to do, and how those actions align with that. I think that would be one curiosity that I have.
Kate, do you want to comment on that? Like, how if somebody, Allandra or anybody else came to you and was like, wait, tell me, how are funders thinking about accountability? What would your answer be?
Well, it's a question we're just teeing up now after almost 100 years, honestly.
Better late than never.
Yes. So it is actually, I don't have a great answer that I'm satisfied with. I was, so I think about it, and again, I think there has to be a sort of organic blurring of the lines between the funding entity and the community that seeks funding. Now, obviously, one of the great challenges of, privileged challenges of being a part of a foundation is you can't make everybody happy, and you do have to make decisions about, okay, how are we going to do this? What aren't we going to do? Because most of funding is saying no. So
yes,
that's just the truth of the matter, else we wouldn't be here. If donors just want to give their money away and be done, and they can do that. A lot of people don't start foundations when they die, right? So you set up a difficult problem from the beginning, because your job is really to say no way more than yes. And then you get into kind of a bind, like, how do we say, well, we have to make judgments. We have to set parameters. And it's not like a bank where, you've done a good job if you've made money from your investments. Like, I think it's actually kind of inappropriate for us to judge our effectiveness by the outcomes of other people's work. So like that doesn't work, right? Because then you're just a funder who's trying to drive an outcome. And I mean, unless you're like the Gates Foundation and you are literally going to pay to eradicate a disease, and you can sort of figure out like, okay, are we done yet? There are very few parallels. So it's not really even appropriate for us to have designs on social outcomes if we're not doing the work. So then the question becomes, well, all right, like, how do we know if we're doing a good job? I think in the social sector, one of the hardest questions to answer is how do you know if you're doing a good job? Like it was
Mm.
always the question I wanted to ask partners, and I still do. And I ask the question sincerely, because I think in the case of nonprofits, they're not given the time and space to answer that question. They're usually trying to answer it based on what their funder wants to hear, whether that's a
Exactly.
public funder, whether it's the government who's giving the money to do certain things, whether it's private funder who has aspirations to see, their purposes fulfilled. But it's a really hard question. And I always ask it sincerely, because to me, really well-led organizations are driven by that question every day, but it's hard to know the answer. So for me as a funder, engaging in that dialogue and supporting an organization in their constant learning, understanding, changing, evolving, and sometimes going out of business, that's not all bad.
I think the work that I'm doing at Co.act, that I and the team are doing, comes from a place of passion and purpose for me personally. So because of that, often the barriers that are real and that exist, certainly, there's the challenge of navigating them. There's the strategy of navigating them. There's the, efforts to be outstanding, to navigate them, right? All of that comes into play. But I often tell folks, the driver for me in this work is that I've got 5 generations of my family living in the city of Detroit. My grandfather at 90 and my youngest niece at 2 years old. And so this isn't just a job, right? Like there are outcomes and impacts at a community and neighborhood level that I want to see come to fruition so that folks in my family, right, and beyond, have the opportunities and the advantages to live a good quality of life. And that for me is a non-negotiable, right? Like my personal integrity, my personal purpose, my personal drive doesn't allow for me to sit on the sideline and see those types of problems and challenges perpetuated and not attempt to do something about it, despite the challenges that exist. And I think that, part of my approach, certainly as we've built Co.act out, is to go back to community power and community voice and community decision making. So a big part of why we've been able to take a cool concept, right, and the identification of some needs and build out what I hope will be a longstanding resource for our community is because community is in it. They're creating it, they're informing it, they're critiquing it, right? They're helping to create something that is, from my lens, for them. This isn't about me, this is about the broader community. I think part of it too is, I'm often looking for the coalition of the willing, right? Within the power structures who have aligned values, who may see the world in some similar ways. And there's an opportunity to connect those dots and leverage that privilege together to make change, right? And it's one of the things that I really appreciate about the work that Kate and her team are doing. She's very modest about the work that they're doing, but I would describe them as an organization that is very self-evaluating, right? They're learning, they're constantly on a learning journey. They're interrogating their approach to equity and anti-racism. They intentionally and deliberately create pathways for dialogue and conversation with their grantees, right? We're a recipient of funding from the McGregor Fund. And when it was time for us to do our annual report this year, I had a conversation with the grants manager, right? That's very different than navigating reporting, right? Written reports and challenges that really aren't getting to the heart of what we're trying to do together. So I offer that up because I appreciate the partnership. But for me, this is much bigger than a job or a role. This is about the people that I love, right? This is about the community that I love. And for me, certainly, it can be challenging at times, but that's why I go rest, right? I fill myself up and get what I need, and then I come back and I fight again another day.
I just want to note that I think this moment, seeing the two of you like start to like have a conversation that feels a little bit uncomfortable, is really powerful. Like the trust that exists between the two of you to be able to say, you know, this is how decisions are made. And also, I know that's not ideal. And, you know, on Allandra, on your side, this isn't just a job for me. This is everything. You know, like there's I think one of the things that I just want to state for our audience is that it's okay that we don't have great answers. It's okay that, you know, this dialogues in general between funders and fundraisers, white and those of color, like it's okay that they're imperfect. We just need to start having them more and not just be communicating through grant reports and due diligence and applications. You know, these are the messy conversations that it takes courage, it takes discomfort, but it takes, you know, what you were saying earlier, Kate, is it takes that internal knowledge that I have to put myself in these positions because the system is not going to do that for me naturally. It's not going to hold me accountable. It's not going to force me to grow. It's not going to, you know, like help me show up in a more authentic manner to try and improve the way I do my work. And the thing is, the more we put ourselves in these situations, the more comfortable it does get, or the less uncomfortable. There we go. The less uncomfortable it becomes. And I just wanted to name that I think the discomfort in these conversations is actually the most important part.
Well,
so
and
thank you.
I'll just add, I'm not really uncomfortable. I just, I understand how I can come across if I'm talking honestly, but I'm not that uncomfortable. And
Right.
when I was talking about quality, I would love to use Allandra again. You all have just heard what drives her, what she brings. Like, isn't it obvious that she's gonna be amazing, and that anyone who doesn't bring all that is just can't do what she can do? That's what I'm talking about here. Like, just write a check and get out of her way. I mean,
you heard her, everybody. Write those checks, get out the way, send them
you
to
know,
Allandra.
that's what I mean by quality. It's not like checking boxes.
Yeah.
It's something you can feel and see. And it's even more impressive because Allandra is in a management support organization, right? She's not even offering direct service or putting on performances. You know, she's in a more abstract place, and you can still feel that passion. I want to just add one thing. I know we're going long.
That's okay.
To comment on Allandra's comment, and forgive me, my dear friend, I want everyone to know that the person she was referring to as the grants manager doesn't have that title. She directs all of our learning. All right. So for us, there's no point in requiring a grant report.
Right.
We do hope to learn with our partners about what they're learning, right? And sometimes we can make connections across partners who don't have the time to find and talk to each other. Yeah. So we are very intentional about that learning, and we feel very, we appreciate that we're taking time to take from other people's learning. So we commit to not keeping it to ourselves. But that is also really important. So thank you for mentioning that, Allandra. We really try to be low barrier, and it's important for funders. We could have a whole other session on what foundation learning needs to be about, and how to design it and how to execute it in a way that is some kind of value add to your partners and not just sucking up a whole bunch of their time and stuff. So pin for next time.
Absolutely. Oh, yes. This is a conversation opener. There's always way more for us to get to. Okay, so rounding everything up today, I would love to just ask for your speed round answers. If we're reflecting on the future, if white funders, fundraisers of color could be more honest and human with each other on a regular basis, and this sort of conversation wasn't unusual, how do you think things would actually look different for communities of color? What does that change?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in and close us for my closeout answer on this. I think that question makes me think about the power and the promise and the potential impact if the untapped, underfunded, talented, and expertise is fully utilized in our community, right? I think we all have a role to play in challenging traditional roles and power dynamics between funders and nonprofit leaders. And I think that starts with developing deeper, more trusting relationships. So like that is the starting place. I think if I look to 25 years from now, I think there's an opportunity to experience better outcomes and greater impact in and with our communities because we insist on equity, right? In grantor and grantor relationships. Like I think that's a decision, that's a choice that has to be made. And I think if by that time we've started to bridge information and communication gaps and work to really enable an environment of openness, honesty, and engaged listening and understanding, then we'll start to see a shift. I think conversely, or in parallel to those types of conversations, is really interrogating the existing structures and really reimagining grant making processes and decision making. I think we need both human-centered relationships, greater accountability, like we discussed, and more equitable structures to really actualize the equitable outcomes that we want to see.
Amazing. Fantastic. I couldn't have said it better myself. And I just want to round us out by saying thank you so much. Really appreciate you both, powerful, strong women in the roles that you're in, and the humility and the strength that you are bringing to those, and your willingness to kind of give us a sneak peek into the conversations that I imagine are not that uncommon in the relationships that you two have and continue to nurture as well. So thank you for allowing us and our audience to come and be a part of that for a little while. Viewers, I would encourage you to check out co.actdetroit.org and McGregorFund.org for more on how these two fabulous leaders and their orgs do their work. We will pop those links into the chat for you so you can get those too there. And of course, we do invite you to check out the Capital Collaborative. That's Camelback Ventures program that helps white funders deepen their commitment and efforts to advance racial equity and racial justice through their work in philanthropy and impact investing. And as per usual, we are on a rolling basis accepting applications for our next cohort, and you can find information online at camelbackventures.org. That is absolutely everything we have time for today, but big gratitude, thanks to you, Allandra, and to you, Kate. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you everybody for tuning in and listening. Take care.